is Ed Sackaney, and I'm from Fort Albany First Nation, which is located in James Bay, west coast of James Bay, Northern Ontario. And how we said in our language is Pimatiziwin. That's how we call Fort Albany. I think that it's a lot of symptoms that are out there. For example, I can talk about personal experience. I'm one of those residential school people, and I was there for a number of years. And while in there, the whole concept of my being was severely altered and invaded. For example, spirituality was not from our content, or our direction was not even in there. It was a foreign replacement. Language was another thing. And also the genders, respecting the gender roles that wasn't there. And just having that nurturing from parents. So when you walk out of there, you come out severely damaged as a human being, because things happen like the abuses, and you can think of all forms of abuses. Then from there, you come into a system where you have to go to school to try to improve your self-being. So having poor education, no job, trying to self-identify myself, it was hard, because anger, rage, all these issues that I inherited at the resident was part of my being. So the only way for the longest time I thought I could deal with that was through drugs and alcohol. And I'm saying huge consumption, huge intake, inducement of drugs. It was not a normal way of socializing. For example, I just couldn't take 1 or 2 beer and walk out. I had to either have 2 or 3 cases and stuff like that. So, and you're talking about drugs, you're talking about speed, you're talking about grass, hashish, acid, all the chemicals. So you put it all in there, it becomes part of your personal system, and you need that just to exist, because I didn't take time to deal with those other symptoms that were part of my life. And it wasn't until about 35 years ago I walked into the cultural development, and I was able to go back to school, and I was able to focus and start working and feeling self-worth and self-worthness. And because for the longest time I couldn't do that. So I think that's why there's so much addictions in this. And you have to deal with racism too. That's all part of it. Like people don't understand that, because, for example, you take a human being, put them in a system that's totally foreign, and when they come out, they don't know who they are. I think one of the most important things is it's the family. It has to start within the family. Like, you can offer all kinds of programming. You can do land-based, you can offer awareness of drug and alcohol, on what speed does, or what, all that stuff. You can do all that. But without the family support and family input, it's just not going to happen. And that's what I see with families right now. They just don't want to take the responsibility of telling their children that way of life can be destructive. And I think that's the most important. It starts from home. How I was able to come out of it was my mom, my awesome mom, who lived to be about 85, 88 winters. She was into that too. She was in the resident, and she was into the alcohol quite heavily. Then all of a sudden she stopped. She said, this is not going to help me or the children. So she stopped, looked after herself, and I looked at that. And I followed her, and my dad, I followed them, because they look happy. So I just had my family. I had a son, like when he was 9 months, I decided I'm going to abstain completely and look for an alternate way of life. So that's where it all starts. The family. It's got to start from the home. The transition from each period, from say from a child boy and all this stuff. Like we had a way of doing it. We had a way of making sure that the men knew their roles as they went along. For example, they became hunters and gatherers and stuff. That just didn't happen. They had to start when they were little and start training. And one of the things that, for example, children will learn is by listening. Go to ceremonies. Be at pipe, sharing circles, healing circles, sweat lodges, and not to be afraid, because that's how I went. That's how I learned as a young man, that the ceremonies were the answer to a lot of my issues. You know, it's if you do the rightful passage, like ceremonies for male, and I can talk of myself on this, is that if I'm taught properly, like what the differences, the stages that I go through in my early life, then I am able to walk in balance and also have relationships based on the seven grandfathers, or however the grandmother teachings and stuff. And let me tell you, I nearly did not make that life because I was really violent, because I wasn't taught how to respect relationships, how to respect the ladies and stuff. I was taught that, you know, they were the tools of the devil and you had to mistreat them that way. It was awful. But here I am at 26, 27. I started embracing that, but you're talking about a few years that I've passed to where I was. Then I had to recapture that and get in touch with that little boy that was in me and start to reliving or reteaching myself of those roles. And it was hard. It was difficult because now I'm in an adult male body, but I had to go back and start to talk to that boy that was mistreated and stuff like that I mistreated as well. But the beauty of all that is I had elders who taught me. And the grandmother, the first person to ever speak to me in a way in my teenage age, was my mother. And of course I didn't listen, because, what does this lady know? She has no education on all this stuff. But little did I know she knew everything about life. And then other male people came into my picture and they started teaching me, I had to go to ceremonies to try to recapture the going from a boy to a youth into a young adult, that sort of thing. And I always said to myself that when I was in residence, if I ever have children, they're never going to go through this like what I'm going through. And I nearly fell in that. And my son, who was 37, at 9 months, I decided, if this kid's going to have a chance, I'm going to teach him the different roles and introduce them to people that can help them. And that's what I tell the youth now. Like, if you go into parenthood, make sure that you try to live the best as you can. Nobody's perfect, but do the best you can. And if you need help, reach out to people that are out there. We still have knowledge keepers that are out there that can help you out, but the communication of trying to get that done is not there. I had to look at self-respect. That was one of the things. I had to learn to love the human being that I was looking at every morning in the mirror. I had to learn to pray. And my grandparents always told me that. Pray, my grandchild, in the morning, in the evening. Greetings in the morning, thankfulness in the evenings. So those are things, but to instill that in your human development, it was not an easy process. So I had to use ceremonies, I had to use the medicines, and I had to use the bush just to go out there and sit in silence, because, when you look at the word silent, mix the letters around, you can come up with listen. Think about it, listen. So when you go to ceremonies, you go fasting or you go to pipes, there's silence there because you're listening to the spiritual realm. So I would tell a young person, go to ceremonies, look for your elders, look for your knowledge keepers, your resource people, Be curious. Always look for answers. They're there, they're out there, but they won't come to you. You have to work towards it. Embracing sobriety is a daily effort. To maintain it, it's every day. Even to this day, now I'm entering my 66th year, I still have to maintain that. And this thing, what you hear about one day at a time makes a lot of sense, because I can't plan like 10 years ahead. And that's even proven because love is another thing. You have to have that part of your life because it's there. It's just a matter of, we've never lost it. We've never lost our teachings. We just buried it. So we have to dig for it, and they're there. And I'm glad that's what I would tell young people is, don't shut down a knowledge keeper, don't shut down ceremonies or even programming that are going to teach you about this. Look at it, embrace it, and find that holistic development. The value of your self-identity, your worthiness is very important, because once you can grasp onto that, like embrace the values of your celebrations of life, of your even grieving or mourning and stuff like that, if you can grasp and deal with it, then it's going to help you as a person. Because I'll tell you why. One of the things I've noticed in my life is that there's a lot of unresolved grieving in our communities. There's a lot of unresolved trauma in our communities. And if we don't deal with that properly, it's going to hurt us. Appreciate your limitations and also embrace what your strengths are. And because if you can do that, then the humanness that you carry will only project to other people. And don't be hard on yourself. Don't be judgmental. Like when a youth come to me, like I really feel for them, but I'll try to work with them. When I look back, there's a couple of healers now that were young and nobody gave them the time of day. And not too long ago, one of them, I've completely forgotten, came and shook my hand back home and said, thank you, because if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be doing this kind of work like the ceremonies, because when I was young, you didn't give up on me. You came and you took me to sweat lodges, and then all of a sudden you're gone. But you left me something that I carried on. And he says, I tell your boys that. I tell your sons that, because it wasn't for your dad, I wouldn't be doing this. And I just listened, and I finally told him, yeah, I gave you the seeds, but you had to make sure that plantation rises. If I had the answer how to grieve, I'd be a freaking rich person, but there's a process. You and I, for example, will grieve differently. And I think some will grieve longer and some can grieve shorter. However, you are going to take it on is solely your own development, but they have to talk about it. They have to reach out to people that they can, this idea of trust, that's most important, trust. Because if I'm going to disclose to you my feelings, I have to trust that you're not going to push it aside or put it out there for anybody. We were taught of self-brutality within these residential schools, and they nearly succeeded. For a man, for example, at one time I couldn't speak about my sexual abuses that was really thrown and weighted on my being. I couldn't, because there's this thing called shame and all this guilt maybe. But you know where I was able to release that? It was in the sweat lodge ceremony. And I think that's how it starts is, it starts with humility. first you have to admit it happened. Then after that, you have to admit it needs to be dealt with. And so, and afterwards, if you have children, you look at your children and say, no, I don't want them to be touched by this. So I have to take care of me. How I dealt with it as a counselor in one of the First Nations, I said to people, if people ask you about it, you just tell them, I can't say anything because I made a solemn promise to the group I won't be talking about this. If you're interested, and if you really want to know, why don't you come to those meetings? You're more than welcome to. And that's how I dealt with it. And let me tell you, it works. And the thing about it too is the youngest person I had to counsel was 8 years old, who was an alcoholic. Now, what are you going to tell an 8-year-old? Oh, you got to go to AA meeting? No, I don't think so. So how I dealt with this was show and tell. And boy, let me tell you, like, I had to show and tell, like, this is what alcohol does and all this stuff. But a year and a half down the road, the lights went on for him, and he says, you really care about me? And I go, yeah, you really care about me? Then I had to go see the parents. And you think they embraced me? Man, they threw me out because how dare you, like, you know. But you know what? It was the mother that came back and accepted some of the responsibility. Then the dad followed. Then that whole family was able to grow. With men, the same thing. If a community can get a group of men together, establish a group, and have boundaries to it, respectful boundaries, so they can develop, and they really have to know that this is not going to be put out in the community or gossip about. So fear, it could be an ally or it could be a foe. It could prevent you from growing up as an individual to confront issues, or it could be an ally to say, I'm going to get over this. And after you attend, like for me, after I attended, I was afraid to talk about my addictions because of what happened to me, the traumas and the grieving and all this stuff. You got to remember, this was implanted on me at an early age because my dad was killed by a non-native person. And I remember that because maybe I was 6. And I remember when I seen people crying in my home. Then I remember that a lot of it had to do with alcohol. Some of them had alcohol in them. Then I always never forgotten when there were 2 police officers there, the OPP, and they were questioning people. Then this other one came in and said, what happened? And I remember this, I've never forgotten what one of the younger police officers told the man, because he had white hair, said, oh, it's just one other Indian that got killed. You know, when I heard that, I'm thinking, well, this other Indian was my dad. And that stays with you, that anger and the fear to want to talk about it or confront people. And once I was able to talk about it and sit in a circle with police officers and bring that up, it released a lot. So fear can prevent your growth, but also fear can help you grow. Our way tells that beautifully. If you don't deal with your fear, the anxiety that builds up could be really the wrong way of dealing with things. So that really affects your emotions. And if you don't deal with the fear and the anxiety in a simultaneous manner, you're going to have an imbalance. So you got physical, emotional, mental, and the last one, the most important, is spiritual, right in your hands. And that's how I was able to relate that to my sons and clients that I've worked with over the years. You have to change your lifestyle. Basically, it's a 180-degree turn, and you're going to get bruises along the way, but don't give up, keep moving forward, because it's easier said than done. But if you can let time elapse, as time elapses, that opposition will weaken. You know, when I first stopped, people were calling me, "Come on out," and all this stuff. And I thought the whole world was ending because I stopped all that. Then I realized, I looked at my son and I realized, this is a good little person here, If he's going to have a chance, then I have to look after me. I tell young people, find a plane that promotes sobriety, and it doesn't have to be like traditionalism. It could be AA, it could be any other form, but not to become self-righteous. It's out there. Find your choice, and once you find your choice, embrace it, cherish it, nourish it, then the growth of your own being will start to happen, and it will touch other people. Talk. Keep talking, keep encouraging, use a little bit of humility, because that's how it starts. When I decided to stop humility, then I use humbleness, because humility, you go in, humbleness, you show outward. That's how it works, and that's how we need to do with our families. And boy, that's difficult. You got to remember, there's years and years of not really communicating. Start dealing with issues like anger, because from there it stems from sexual abuse. Start talking about it. Talk to somebody. Develop trust. Go to, people say we can't do it on the First Nation. Sure we can. It's just that we need to show a lot of love and a lot of patience, and we need to just be there, because back home, when people talk, I listen. And my granny taught me that, my grandma taught me that the first sign of love is to listen. I used to wonder about that, what that meant. And then when I had my first son, when I heard him cry for the first time, I just felt that love. And that's the thing. We have to listen, and we're not listening right at the moment. But the young people are getting more savvy, they're getting more educated, not only in the Western sense, but their own background. And boy, once you get them balanced like that, there's no stopping them. To forgive is like letting go. And let me tell you, once I had to really get a lot of teachings from that. There's teachings on that. And I had to really start looking at it. And because if you can forgive, you're unleashing a lot of issues that you've been carrying. And I'm speaking about experiences. Because once I was, like a person did harm to me, I would hang on to that. Then finally I decided, no, it's not worth the effort or the energy. I'd rather put it elsewhere. For me, I lived with my grandparents. I was born in the bush. And back then we had the true family extension. We don't have that now. It's sad. So my grandparents, they lost children. I think she lost 14 aunts and uncles of mine due to diseases like smallpox, chicken pox, whooping cough, you name it. In a matter of 3 to 5 years, lose all those children. My mom survived. So that's what colonization did, because we didn't have, and she ended up in a residential school when she was 6 months, because they went there, and my grandma used to talk to me. We paddled over there. We went to see the missionaries and say, we want that. I guess they had just discovered penicillin. And they told them, hey, yeah, we'll give you that, but you got to leave your child here. So they took my mom at 6 months, and she stayed in the school till she was 16. So that whole gap of nurturing is missing. To black, or say to them, you don't do it, we have the cops here and we'll put you in the jail. We'll put you in prison. That's what my grandma, and she said, so that, because we've lost all the other children, so that your mom could live, we had to, and we had no backup, no power. And that was the hardest thing for us to do, was paddle away and leave our daughter. And she was there until 16. And so that's what colonization has done. And it's done that to a lot of families. Some kids never came home. Can you imagine how devastating that is? Because there's no proper goodbye, no proper way of closing that. We need to bring the ceremonies, the celebrations, the birthing and all that stuff back into our existence, because that's what our blood did, the bloodlines did. They went up, and that's how we were able to survive and really be productive. We had a productive system. No one went hungry. So if you're talking about bloodline, there's been so much interference, so much interjections, and the gaps have been really spread out quite. We have to go back and shorten that gap or bridge the gap so that way our children will have that vital bloodline flowing, which is justifiable. But it's a lot of work. Kindness is not to take advantage of people. Kindness is to develop people. And that's what for me, that's what it is. And let me tell you, I've seen it. And I've seen it with the, for example, like if a female, like I used to teach my counselors in the sexual abuse lodge, if you see any of the women sitting by themselves, go talk to them. Because I used to do that and the tears would come. Because I was being kind while they were with us. And they've seen that. And I teach the female counselors, you have to do that because she is one of your own. If it's a male counselor, I had to teach my male clients, you got to trust our female counselors because they're here because they're being kind to you and they want to care. So there's a lot to, we had 5 weeks. It's not a long time. But we did the Western input, but also we had ceremonies at the end. And boy, let me tell you, the resistance at first to ceremonies was real. But once we got there, they couldn't get enough of it because they saw the kindness of the ceremonies. Well, I think one of the things I've learned is, I remember a young man, I was on my way because I do powwow, I dance and all. I went and this young man sitting there, and he looked awful, like you can tell he lived on the streets, and he was asking for money, and I walked by because he was sitting outside where I was eating, so there's, So I said, look, I'll help you, I'll buy you the food, but I'll tell you something. I said, there's a powwow, like a gathering about a block up. I would really suggest to you, why don't you take some time and go over there? Go enjoy it, go look, you don't have to do anything. You can just walk in, it's free. Just sit there and listen to the drums, look at the dancers and stuff. And he says, well, they won't accept me. I said, how do you know that? Just go. And I guess he must have listened to me because a year down the road I seen him and he was with one of the women that liked to dance. And then a couple of years down, he was dancing. So that's the thing, is be open to any possible positive possibilities. The sacred fire, the fire keeper. That's the most loneliest thing you can do, is be a fire keeper. That's how I started. And let me tell you, like that's opened, that sacred fire, being a fire keeper, opened a lot of doors for me because nobody wanted to do that when I was younger because it was too lonely. The power would be happening and you're stuck in this teepee to look after this fire. And sometimes I had to beg to go to the washroom because I needed to go. But that's how it all started, that simple fire. That sacred fire and light, it just ignited stuff in me. And that's how I would tell. And plus it gave me a place to rest and take a snooze because the fire is not going to go out just like that. And I got to meet people and I got to start talking about my situation and they listen. So I think that's what, go to your ceremonies. You don't have to participate right away, as long as you're there. Do something for it. If you have to bring the rocks in, the grandfather, do it. If you have to bring water, do it. That's how it all starts. Make your connections. Make good connections. You've already made connections in a negative way. Now start making some positive connections, and those are easier, not as easy as being said. They're challenging. So you'll have to roll up your sleeves and say, I want this change to happen. This is what I need to do. And you have to have a plan.